As I say, I'm now going to introduce today's guest speaker, Joe Simcox. Joe, great to have you with us.
Hi everyone, happy Tuesday morning. Lovely to see some really familiar faces over the last few weeks and some new faces, so welcome. Hopefully we can get a really interesting debate and conversation going. So thanks to, first of all, to all of you who've participated in Matt's poll that he put on LinkedIn regarding some areas of leadership. And I just thought I'd give you a history why I've picked the topic of leadership. So for some of you may have seen my tweet yesterday that I put out in a panic. I'm currently doing a master's focused on leadership, and the topic I'm choosing for my dissertation is a leadership model, and I'm not going to give you that model to influence any of you just yet, a leadership model in social housing. And that's kind of the speciality I'm looking at. When you look at a lot of the theoretical research, there isn't a huge amount around social housing. And as we all know, as a sector, we've got a lot of challenges coming up, and we've had a lot of challenges previously in the last few years, especially, that have challenged those leadership models. So I thought I just wanted to touch on them and kind of give you an insight of where I'm going. So I'm going to have a go, if I can, of just sharing something which I may
I've realised we haven't made you a co-host because I was running a few minutes late this morning. So if you do that one, just while you're doing that, Joe, I've just put something in the chat there, but if anybody would like to come in on the chat at any time, feel free. You can either enter something on the actual chat conversation or use the raise hand emoji, which is at the bottom of your screen, and I'll bring you in then as we go through the conversation. Back to you, Joe. Okay,
so hopefully you can all see the PowerPoint slide I've shared. Touch wood. Yeah, you can see Matt's thumbs up and nodding. So giving you the 4 different leadership styles that we put the poll on, and some people in the LinkedIn post made some really good comments that a true leader demonstrates all of those different styles we put the poll on. So if we start from the top left-hand corner, we've got charismatic. Does anyone recognise some of the faces I've chucked in there as some of the examples? So you've got Steve Jobs, Nelson Mandela and Hitler. Whether we agree with their principles or not are completely different, but they were all very charismatic leaders within the field that they wanted to be in. And as part of being those charismatic leaders, they're very communicative, easy for me to say, they're confident, they're good listeners, and they've got great determination. And then we've got our autocratic leaders. I've probably chosen not the best people as examples. So we've got Stanley Kubrick, I think off the top of my head, Putin and Trump, and they're very knowledgeable. They're very task orientated, very detail and planning orientated, and a key decision maker. And especially in social housing, we do need elements of that within our leadership. We've then got our developers who were able to create that concept of future and vision. They're able to build and foster a community that they're committed to the growth of others, quite often before themselves, and they recognise deep emotion and active listening. And our examples of that are Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi and the Dalai Lama, and they're our servant leadership. And then we've got our authentic leadership, and we've got Jacinda, Tony Blair, and I've completely blanked. Ukraine president. I apologise for my lack of names there. I've just gone complete blank there. And that's it. Thank you. I went on a real complete blank. Very embarrassing. So they've got the self-awareness and their integrity, and they lead with that vision, and they share the credit and successes. So when I've been looking at the leadership, one of the things I've got there is, do any of those leadership styles translate into what we're trying to deliver day to day within our organisations and for those around us? And so some of the questions I wanted to try and consider today is, what is the difference between the leader and a manager? Has the landscape of leadership changed with all the things that have happened within the social housing sector over the last few years and the vision moving forward, what specific traits as a leader should we be having, and is anyone a leader within social housing? And lastly, from the poll, it was an overwhelming 80-something%, I think Matt's just said, out of 200 people who voted, who said that authentic leadership is the desired leadership style.
83%.
83% moving forward. So if that's our preferred style from our peers who have taken the time to vote in that poll, what does that mean in social housing? So just kind of some of the points I want to cover today. So has anyone got any initial thoughts?
I'm interested to know what everyone thinks the authenticity means.
Yeah, that's a great start. Absolutely, Claire. So for me, I think, from my personal opinion, authenticity is being true to yourself. You're the same person that you are at work that you are with your mates. Again, the name's gone out of my head. I'm really bad at this morning. The Finnish PM who's come under a lot of scrutiny this weekend for partying with her mates. And she absolutely says, you know, that's it. Thank you. My political awareness isn't so hot this morning, obviously. That she's very aware, you know, she's given that's her. Yes, I'm owning that I'm transparent. I wouldn't have wanted those videos to go social as much as they have, but I'm owning that I like a party at the weekend because I'm that age group and that's what I like to do. So to open Claire's question out to everyone else, is what does authenticity mean to other people in the room?
Feel free to put something in the chat if you don't want to kind of raise your hand. But I think, you know, I know when we've talked about this before, Joe, it was very much that idea of almost using your authenticity to inspire trust. And that's sometimes where one of the big difficulties comes in, I guess, in leadership, is that ability to kind of inspire trust through being purely authentic, because it's what you always feel you can, you know, you have to be a very, very open book in order to be able to do that.
Yeah. Jim.
Yeah, I think I can't disagree with what you've already said. I just think that, you know, you are what you are at the end of the day. I think sometimes we've leadership, I'm not so sure sometimes whether or not you can be taught everything around being a leader. You know, I think there's, with your own traits and the way that you've been brought up, I think sometimes you get some people that just manage, and you get people that genuinely care about people. And I think you've got to be a real people person to be a good, authentic leader. You know, I genuinely care about my guys, you know, and I always try and put myself in their position in terms of when we're trying to solve a problem. You know, I want them involved. I want to work with them. I want to solve that problem for them. I don't want to just say to them, you know, you are doing this today and this is the process we put in place and you are going to work to it. My stance is very much, we look at the problem, we look at it together, we work together. You show that authenticity that you genuinely care about them, but ultimately I will make the decision, but they will know that, you know, I'm making that decision based on the fact that I'm caring and thinking about their welfare and they're making their job easier. So I think that's, and again, it's about being consistent with that. And, you know, you've got to be consistent in the way that you lead people. And also I think, you know, for me, it's okay to show vulnerability with leadership as well and make it quite clear that you haven't got all the answers. I've worked for a number of managers, and I'll call them managers because I wouldn't class them as leaders, but they always think they know best. And I certainly don't always know best. And I always think that I inspire people by allowing them to actually come up with the right answers, and I go with it. And I think that inspires a lot of people when you do that.
It's really interesting, as Claire Lawrence has put there in the chat, that you can't be authentic unless you are. Honey has agreed with you, saying integrity is key. And Sarah Sargent, I think, backed you up there, Jim, by saying that being prepared to speak up when your values are compromised. But I think a lot of that comes with trust. And Joe, I know this is exactly, you know, where this came from today, didn't it? Jim's point there. Yeah,
and I think I definitely agree with you there, Jim. I was having this debate with someone within my own organisation, that if you are being your true authentic self, it's okay to say I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's okay to say what your faults are, if you like, and I don't necessarily like using the word fault, but I'm quite happy to admit I'm a little bit hyperactive at times, but I own that and work with my team and teams on that and my peers. So it's like you say, it's recognizing that you don't know everything and you can't pretend to know everything, because otherwise people lose respect on that. So Sarah, I can see you've got your hand up. Sarah Shaw, sorry.
Yeah, hi, thanks for bringing me in. Yeah, I mean, I just echo, Jim stole most of what I wanted to say, actually, so you're a great leader, I think, Jim. But I think that allowing other people to be experts is so important. I think especially as you become more senior and you don't know everything about everything, and to just go, I don't know, this is your area, what do you think? And then kind of facilitating and supporting other people to think things through. But I think the other point that I really wanted to make that I think I found really important, particularly as a woman, and as you become more senior, is that you don't have to be like everybody else. You don't have to look like everybody else. You don't need to dress like everybody else. And I remember when I got my first kind of what I considered to be a leadership role, and buying these really boring clothes and going into work and feeling like I was in a costume, and I wasn't myself. And if you're in an environment where you can't be yourself, or being yourself isn't valued and appreciated, then you need to be somewhere else. And I think, again, I took a really long time to realize that, and to have the confidence that if you can't be yourself where you are, you need to be somewhere else. And there will be someone that's looking for someone like you, and with your skills and you, the way that you dress, the way that your hair is, what you look like, everything. If you're not comfortable where you are, go and be somewhere else. That would be my advice to anyone, and don't hesitate, because it won't change.
Yeah, and I agree, Sarah. I think it is absolutely, you've got to be yourself. If you're having to put on a mask, if you like, for want of a better phrase, then you're not being yourself, and people recognise that. And you're not in fostering, as Sean, as Michael picks up, that people need to be open and honest with you, and they're recognising you're not being open and honest with yourself. You're not going to create that empowerment and that trust that you want to foster as a leader.
I've had exactly this kind of thing. I was going to say, I've had exactly this in terms of, and I know, Joe, you and I have talked about it before as well, which is you can be a leader all you want, but if your management style doesn't match the leaders of the business, quite often you'll just get critiqued for that and told, oh, well, you're doing it wrong, no matter how much trust you've built with your team or where the trust is. And I think that's also a big part of it, is realizing there are different management styles, and management and leadership are two very different things at times. But yeah, Michelle, let's please, good to have you with us.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Yeah, I think this authenticity, it's really knowing yourself as well, and being comfortable in your own skin. I mean, Sarah, you mentioned about putting a uniform on that's not really you. And we've all kind of done it, and I agree, being a female, that you kind of have to step up that mark because of that image that people have. But unless you truly know yourself and aware of your own skill sets and behaviours, and we all try and put ourselves into these boxes of leadership. How do we react in certain situations? We've got DISC, we've got Myers-Briggs, we've got MAP, we've got so many of these, and we still try and say, right, okay, but you're this colour, you're that. We're everything, and we shift so much through our lives. We're not the same person we were 6 months ago. We're not the same person we were 5 years ago. And it's recognising this. So perhaps you have reacted a certain way in a meeting, but it doesn't mean that that is your natural state. It might be something else that's going on. And I think that's the authenticity, is being able to recognise when you are at your best and when you're not. But yeah, it's good to be here, guys.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely vital point, Michelle. If I look at the manager, I wouldn't even say I was a leader 5 years ago. I'm not a completely different person, because I'm still me, but I am a different style of leader and manager. The principles are still the same, but my temper's calmed down. I can tell you that for one.
Because I think, and this is something I want to make sure we come on to today, is that also because you're now being allowed to be yourself. And I think this is something that we definitely need to be talking about today. And I'm going to bring Sally in a moment, but as everybody's roundtables, we always want to make sure that what we're talking about is something where we can actually make change. and we're talking about authenticity as a trait. So how do we inspire that in terms of allowing people to be their authentic selves and yet still be good at what they do? But Sally, let me bring you in.
Yeah, it was just to say, it for me, it's also about ethos. And I learned the hard way when I was a chief exec that if your ethos and that of the board don't match and then don't chime, then it ain't going to end well. I mean, luckily for me, it ended okay, but it's about making the time to find that out and making that part of your intellectual curiosity when you're going for a role or going for a leadership role, to actually suss that out. Because whilst you're leading the organization, they're leading in a strategic higher level way than you're expected to lead. And if those trustees, directors don't get it, then, I mean, when I left the role, I was asked to hand over all the things that I was chair of, and all those sorts of things that were region wide. And I was just like, well, actually, they don't automatically come to me. They came to me because of who I am. They don't go with the job of being chief exec. And that just showed how little they understood about their role and my role in terms of leadership across that region. So yeah, so for me, that ethos bit is part of the authenticity bit. And without that chiming, it doesn't work. And I've discussed that with Matt before, and I've turned roles down because I know if the ethos doesn't chime in interview now, forget it. And I'll stick where I am, or I'll stay unemployed. End of.
And I think you're right there, Sally, isn't it? We know as a sector that there's a huge focus on the culture, isn't there? Well, not just the sector, in society as a whole. And it's, quite often in the past, and Matt's probably the better person to speak on this, organisations, it was almost that you recruit for the skills first and culture second. And same with people going for roles, is you go for the job first and then the culture second. It's actually turning it on the head now, isn't it? And it's making sure that a culture of any organisation fits your own values, fits your own authentic self, and that you are able to be yourself. You're not having to be a version of yourself.
Absolutely key. We've talked, and I know there've been a number of people on the roundtables who came to the branding one that I ran a little while ago. And actually Emma, who I'm going to bring in a moment, we did one about how to connect better with EDI groups. All of this is absolutely vital, because if your cultures are around tenants, around proper customer involvement, around EDI, around inclusion, and you aren't showcasing that on, not just on, a website or a careers page, but also on, your LinkedIn. And when you come through the door, and it isn't just a poster somewhere, but you live and breathe those values, if they aren't aligned, then you aren't being authentic. And if that authenticity, ironically, isn't coming through, then you aren't going to get the authentic people that you're looking to hire. So they very, very much go hand in hand. But Emma, let me bring you in. I'm going to jump to some of the messages in the chat.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Yeah, there was just a couple of points, and absolutely, I think BDHT have started the work in terms of recognising that behaviours and attitudes are absolutely innate, and you can take an apprenticeship, for example, and spot the behaviour that you want and is the leadership of your future. And that there aren't that many jobs anymore where the skills and experience can't be trained. That's the bit that you can almost say, we'll train you on that. But your behaviour, your attitude, your positivity, for example, is what we really want to harness. And our job descriptions, our interviews are looking exactly for that. And it does go to the ethics, and it does go to the culture. I think the other point for me, that when we talk about leadership, and this is sometimes where the leadership gets challenging, is when you start talking about making people accountable. Because as a leader, you absolutely do need to do that. It's not just your manager's responsibilities to make sure that organisation is ticking, it's meeting its targets and its objectives. And that can be the default when your leadership style falls under stress and starts to show some of those negative behaviours, perhaps where it does go back to, have you done this check? But I don't think we should be afraid of that as leaders. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that we still need to make the business work. We still need to drive performance. We still need to hold people accountable, but our leadership skills should drive that better than if we just default to management and making it a tick box exercise. So I hope I made sense then. I felt like I might have waffled, so apologies.
No, not at all, Emma. And I think it's Simon put in the chat earlier, it reinforces that. He's put ensuring that you're encouraging people to challenge you and genuinely listen. Having yes people can result in that disillusion and failure. And I think just going one step on that is encouraging people to challenge you and encouraging that challenge as leaders, challenging back as well, and making everyone that accountable, transparent and open. And that's what we're trying to be as a sector, isn't it? That's the result of the white paper, that customer voice and influence. It's bringing in that transparency, that openness, that ability to be accountable for things. So I absolutely agree. I know with
Claire backs you up there in the chat. Speaking up comes in so many ways. I recently expressed in a strong opinion to support a member of my team. It was intimidating but utterly worthwhile. And so not just brilliant, obviously you did that, Claire, but that it was then taken in the light that it needs to, because else, as you say, you just end up with a business where things don't change. I can see Honey has put in the chat there, true leaders have empathy on people and being able to connect and inspire at times, show your vulnerability, show you are a true human and not just robotic. People start believing in you. Nam, leadership should also be an element of serving and supporting those who you lead. It encourages that honesty and authenticity. Jim has mentioned about culture, that it being so important, and he works together with the team. Getting the culture right is key and leads to a really gelled team who help each other and obtain desired results. And finally, Sally, the other key thing which I found out was that leadership is about creating followship, something which all the leaders in Joe's initial slide have in common. Joe, the idea of followship is quite an interesting one.
Yeah, and it is, you're absolutely right there, Sally. And that was one of the reasons where I said, or asked the question is, can anyone be a leader? And from my viewpoint, yes. And it's how, as a leader, we can create that follower principle, and it's how you share that vision and communication. And I think in traditional type of organizations, it's that viewpoint of someone can only be a leader if they've got a job title, manager in their job title, or leader, or head of, or chief exec, etc., etc. But actually, anyone can be a leader, and if they can get someone to listen to their vision, and some of that. One of the challenges I'm discussing within my MBA research is I'm interviewing customers about their perception of leaders within social housing, because it isn't just about our colleagues, our peers, but it's also our customers are leaders. And that's certainly, Sally's just picked up that leaders versus influencer. And it could be technically, are they the one and the same thing of being a leader? Are you also an influencer? And if you're an influencer, are you a leader in some things? Because a leader isn't necessarily, it's not just a job title, but it's how you're driving that change and accountability, that transparency and that openness. I'm going to bring Alison in now.
Hi, I've just been scribbling a few notes down, and they're not that well connected, but I suppose I'm thinking about leadership as a team, because if you sort of lower down an organisation, it's not just a single leader you see, it's kind of how they operate as a unit. And I think that can make a big difference. You can have potentially a leadership team with, going back to your different traits, where some of them have got some of them or all of them, and the synergies there. But then you also get cultures where conformity to maybe the dominant models encouraged. So I think the links between the different leaders and their behaviours is important, which sort of overlaps with Sally's point about where she had a disconnect perhaps with the board's view. And then that got me thinking about, having worked in local authorities, about when you're dealing with a sort of political situation and where the councillors have technically got the power and the policy making decisions, and how you might need to lead differently in that area. And the final thing that went through my head was related to the professionalism discussion we had the other week. And people have been saying, well, we can't train things, and we can need people for their values and not their knowledge. I'm just interested in the balance between that and what the discussion we had there about the importance of senior leaders being professionally qualified in housing. So
Yeah.
that's more questions
love
than
that.
answers. But
No, love
I
that.
love that
Go on,
challenge.
Joe, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks for that. And I agree, Alison. I think that's a really good challenge, isn't it? That it's, you know, as much as I've been banging on, for want of a better phrase, about being authentic self, and it's that cultural leadership, which is absolutely important. When you are a leader, especially within a senior leadership team, you want to, as people looking up to people, they might not be subject matter experts, but we also want to know that these people know what they're talking about. We want to know that these people are qualified to do the role and sell that vision. And again, picking back up with Sally's challenge of that leader versus influencer, that picks up that element as well of, yes, you want someone to influence change. We want someone to make sure that they're able to have that followership and drive that vision. But it's also, we need that element of that leadership with the autocratic side of leadership that I was talking about, where it's the Putin and the Trumps of the world, whether we agree with them or not. It's looking at that. I was going to say the qualifications, that might be the wrong word for those two examples, but they've got that followership because they're demonstrating that passion, but also they're demonstrating some element of attention to information, attention to detail, and if they are demonstrating that they are qualified enough. And bringing back to that point of the roundtable we had a few weeks ago, there was a fantastic debate of qualifications within social housing, you know, within the housing as a whole. Is to be that authentic leader, in my eyes, is yes, we absolutely have to acknowledge that you do need to know what you're talking about. You do need to know that you've got lots of room, that you've got lots of skills, both professional and personal skills, but it's also recognizing that you're never too far in your game to keep developing yourself and acknowledging where your weaknesses are, if that makes sense.
Isn't it, massively about trust? If someone can consistently show that they do know what they're about, you will trust them as your leader, and that does take time. And sometimes time is something we aren't, unfortunately, have lots of space to give. But Claire has mentioned there, the best leaders don't know they are. I find the current "I'm a leader" statement difficult to comprehend, and it tied in nicely with actually Michael Steele's point there, which was emotional intelligence and judging your audience. It's about knowing that people are, as you say, I think a lot of time leadership is just someone who naturally, ironically, takes the lead. It isn't necessarily given a, oh, you're now doing this. It's actually they know what they're talking about. Let's go and speak with them and see whether or not they can help drive this forward. And I know actually in the LinkedIn group, someone said, do we even need leaders in housing? Can't we all be on a level playing field? But I think one of the things I pushed back on was that people naturally take a lead, and some people don't necessarily want to be leaders themselves. And yet that's okay, as long as you're following people who are, if we go back to that values and ethos piece of a business, showcasing the values and ethos of the company that you've got. And if you are in housing and you're working for a business where actually a leader in that business isn't showcasing the values of your company, well, why not? And what are you doing to fix it? Jim, I'm going to bring you in.
A couple of things, Matt. I totally agree about that, about experience. I think that's something I've seen a lot, really, where sometimes, seen in policing, where, say, for example, somebody will say be taken, they're a seasoned detective, they then get put on a neighbourhood team. They haven't got, they're great leaders, but they don't understand the environment, the concepts of what that means. From an ASB point of view, from my point of view, I'm confident that I've done it at ground level and then gone all the way through to obviously now to the ops lead that I'm doing now. You have to know what you're doing. It's like this week, I've got a manager off, and I can very comfortably sit into their role and take on their role and make the decisions and get down to that sort of that ground level with the troops and help them whilst that manager's off. That works two ways. It means that the troops get that support while the manager's off, but also that manager gets the support from me when they are on leave and they come back, and they're not going to have anywhere near the workload that they would have if that work was on left for this week. So that's the first thing, I think, is that experience is so important. And I think that then, allows troops to follow you because you understand the subject and you can make those key decisions. And I think the other key thing for me around leadership is having the ability and sometimes the guts to be able to lead upwards as well. Particularly when you're working in local authority environment like I am, and I know some of you here are, you do get those kind of political battles that you've got to stand firm and be true to yourself and, not sort of buckle under pressure, because I think sometimes there is a tendency, particularly when you get involved in that political kind of environment, where people will ask you to do things that you're not particularly comfortable with, and you've got to be bold enough and strong enough as a leader to manage upwards as well.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, Jim. And I think for me, it's never being afraid to challenge and be challenged. And, to use a recent example where I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying, oh, I had to go and take something to a chief exec's office. And they were like, oh, I can't go in there. And I was like, well, why not? It doesn't matter who they are. Or if you see someone not demonstrating company values, call them out on it. There's nothing wrong with that. But then taking Sally's point, it doesn't always go down well, but at the same time, it's being true to your own values. If you're seeing something that doesn't sit right with you, for me to be that my own self and comfortable with my own values, if I see something that isn't right against those values, never be afraid to say.
So, Joe, from your experience and from obviously what you're doing with your thesis and things on those lines, what needs to change?
Simon's put a fantastic so go on.
That's all right. Mine cut out while you were speaking there, so I didn't know whether or not that was just on my screen. Sorry. I was saying, in terms of, yeah, absolutely, we can go to Simon's question. What are people's thoughts on leaders' behaviours being driven by organisational culture? But to me, that's got to be imperative. That's just, I don't know how you find that in your research so far.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely, it's a challenge I've thrown out to our leadership team this morning. And I know Jim visited our offices last week, I think it was, Jim, to do some ASB training.
I certainly did.
Yeah. So we've had a big change in our organisational structure over the last 2 years. Huge changes in our leadership team. I would say over half the leadership team are new this year, just through different changes. And we brought in some new values that spell out the word respect. And I challenged a peer, but also one of our exec team, who aren't always the best at responding back to emails, at a member of one of my team who managed the complaints within the organisation. I said, if you're not demonstrating respect to someone who is undertaking their role is time imperative to get back to people, how are you driving that leadership and organisational culture? How are you demonstrating that? And it stops and makes people think. And I think for me, within that research, and it's that authentic piece, is if you're a true authentic leader, you are being open to challenge, you are being transparent. And Joe Lecky put something earlier in the chat, is never being afraid to say, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball on something, or do you know what, I just didn't do it, you're right to call me out.
We said that backed up by Sherry in the chat there, to thine own self be true. And I think that's it, isn't it? If we're talking about authenticity, it's if you're, I think it's also being bold enough to be able to go, if the culture of this business has changed, then I need to leave. If it doesn't tie in with my own anymore. And I know that's happened for a lot of people with mergers. And I've lost count actually over the last 18 months, 2 years of people that have been through redundancies as mergers have gone on, or been given the option to take a redundancy. And the culture of the business they were in compared to the one that is, maybe of this bigger organization has changed that much. They've gone, if we go back to Sherry's point, to thine own self be true, well, it doesn't represent their own values anymore. And so they are moving on. And I think that's a really interesting part of leadership is, I guess you have two parts within that. First and foremost, leaders in a company who see the culture changing and decide to leave, but also businesses like community housing, which have gone the other way, which is we want to change our culture. And to do that, we're going to bring new leaders in. And that's a massive challenge in itself as well, to be someone driving a new culture based on leadership within a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is for me, it's how it all interweaves, and that's where I found that this topic of leadership is quite contentious. It's quite emotional. It's very cultural, and any element of society. So that's one of the reasons I've chosen it as my dissertation topic. But I think it's absolutely, with all the challenges. I know it's one of our roundtable speakers. I think, is it next week or the week afterwards? We've got Ben Jenkins coming to speak to us, who is to put it politely, a vocal critic of social housing organisations, but absolutely fantastic that he is a leader within his field of looking, of how he can drive that change within social housing from a customer viewpoint and that influence. But I think for me, it's one of the topics I want to have that discussion on is where on LinkedIn, people have said there are the different elements. I'm not saying authentic leadership is absolutely the right way to go. Someone touched on in the chat earlier that people need that element of servant leadership to empower those around them. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's, again, part of that's how I like to feel I style my leadership style in a way, is being that authenticity, but that servant leadership of developing others, helping people develop themselves, be the best that they can be, whether it's in the career that they're working for me for or moving on elsewhere. It's being that best person that they can be for them. So
what do you think needs to change, Joe? Because when we're going through these, everyone's talking about authenticity being like the key factor. And do you think the sector itself is missing authentic leaders at the very top, or do you feel that they're just, I'm going on the poll, if so many people think that is the way to be, why isn't there sometimes, or why is that, I guess, that trust and disconnect sometimes, I guess, particularly between housing associations and tenants? Because if there was that clear authenticity at all times, I doubt we'd have as many issues as we do.
I think my personal opinion is, and I was again having this conversation this morning just around my own organisation, is it's great to say everyone, we're an authentic leader, or that's where we want to be. But quite often as leaders, or as a sector, we get bogged down in the day-to-day job, and we all have that we want to do X, Y, and Z. We all want to be transparent, and it's, are we actually listening? I think someone picked it up in the chat earlier where they talked about, do we demonstrate that emotional intelligence? We all think we may have that emotional intelligence, and I'm very guilty of this, thinking I know who I am, I know what my faults are. I could be too critical on myself, or I could be too lenient on myself. But it's actively seeking that emotional intelligence, listening to others. And as a sector, I think we strive to be authentic. No one goes out to on their day job and aims to do a bad job. No one goes out and aims to deliver a bad service. But if we're truly being authentic, do we actually listen to some of the feedback that's coming back from customers? I'm going to throw that out to the rest of the room, that question.
I thought we had somebody jumping in there. So the question is, are we authentic for customers? Is this the...
Yeah, as a sector, are we authentic, Jim?
Yeah, I think we are where the complaints are genuine. I think the problem I have in my service is that you get a lot of people that expect too much, and I think that's around where I work very hard my team to kind of manage those expectations, because I think if you just take ASB as an example, we can do too much for customers, and I have some very difficult conversations with customers around what we can do and what we can't do. But I think where there is a genuine request for help, then I think and I can only talk from my own experiences, but I think the customer gets a very, very good deal, and they get well looked after.
Sally?
Yeah, from my point of view, it's about letting the customer know that they are being listened to. It's and what the and Matt heard me say this before, is that you said we did thing. And you can listen to customers all you like, but you've got to also you've got to understand their journey, and you've got to take them with you on your journey. And that's quite difficult, and especially for the larger housing associations, the ones that have merged to actually do that. And again, the same with local authorities too. And it's about empowering the customer to be able to have a voice, and how you do that is going to be different in every single case. Where I've done that in the past, it's been on a geographic basis, and on a community by community basis. But it makes my head explode thinking of how on earth you do that when you've got 50-odd thousand residents.
And this is definitely one of the problems. And I'm finding, I mean, you have a look at what Quajo is doing at the moment, and I'm not disagreeing with Jim at all there. I think there is definitely an element of, there are services and there are teams in social housing across the country doing things very, very well. And there are businesses that are really doing things well. However, as Claire has put in the chat there, we other residents, making them different to us. It happens, it really does. And our customers don't trust us to being let down in the past. And there are certainly teams that ignore it and hope it goes away. And so I don't know where that kind of comes on the authenticity piece, but certainly it comes under a taking ownership piece. And leadership's absolutely, it is all about that. And I think this is the biggest frustration. And I guess where my question was coming from originally for Joe, who I wasn't expecting you to answer and fix the world, Joe, but me, I tend to ask the difficult ones. It's social housing at the moment isn't getting, as it always does, it isn't getting the good news stories it deserves. It isn't being portrayed in the media that it absolutely should be. But equally, there's parts of the businesses like what Quajo and others are doing and calling out bad practice, and like Ben Jenkins are doing, and like others out there. And so I guess the pushback is, if those who are actually having to, it's like I'm a private tenant. If my landlord owned multiple properties and all of them are falling apart, I'd be incredibly vocal, going, "We'll just fix this, sort it out, what's going on." So that taking ownership piece is a big bit of leadership. And Joe, I guess under the four things that you've got there, do you think it comes most under authenticity, or do you think it comes under a different trait?
For me, I think taking ownership is absolutely fully under authenticity, but I think it also falls into charismatic type of leadership as well, because if you're taking ownership, you've got to communicate about it. And I think as a sector, we're not always brilliant at communicating. Again, picking up the point Joe Leckie made earlier, is we're not always good at saying sorry. We'll try and talk about everything else, bar actually saying, do you know what, we're sorry that this has happened, we're sorry X, Y and Z, because we don't want to. This
was one of the big fallouts of Grenfell and others, actually, wasn't it? Was that and actually what's gone on with Peabody recently and Clarion is that the CIH haven't come out, who are obviously the membership, I know they're a training business with the membership body, and gone, actually this is what we're doing about it, and we apologize for what's going on in the sector. Claire, I'm really glad you've jumped in, because you've obviously put a few things in the chat today, so it's great to have you with us, Claire. There we are. Got you now.
I couldn't unmute. Sorry, I was
that.
struggling to unmute myself. Do apologise. I think my internet connection's a bit ropey potentially today. There's something in that little bit of conversation about authenticity and taking ownership. I think it's something that's infecting the whole sector, really, that I see in my own organisation and I see elsewhere as well. The lack of ownership and passing things to other departments and passing things to other organisations to resolve. And like, it's not my fault. It's not my issue to resolve. I can't do anything about it. Ism.
And where do you find, because obviously I know you have certainly, I know we've talked about these on the roundtables before, we've become more challenging of those when you see poor performance, poor behaviour, or as you mentioned earlier, you had an issue there with a colleague who wasn't treating someone with respect. Where do you find, in terms of the the flip side of kind of poor leadership. What do you think of the poor leadership traits that you see are standing out?
I think for me, some of the poor leadership traits are the lack of empathy and lack of emotional intelligence, and focusing too much on one thing and not necessarily looking at that holistic view, especially within organisations. I think someone picked it up in the chat earlier, where they used the example, and I always feel sorry, we always pick on finance in these type of conversations. Quite often within a housing organisation, it's like making sure that if leaders, they have to have an awareness of what's going on across the rest of the organisation, instead of just focusing on the black and the white of the financials. It's having an awareness, and I think someone put it in about, if you're in finance, having an awareness of those housing issues. If you're in housing, having an awareness of finance issues. And
that's where the qualification comes in, isn't it? You
yes.
know, if there is a leadership qualification, not a management, a leadership qualification, is understanding how a housing association works is an integral part to that.
Yeah, and I did some customer service training many years ago, and they talked about it, and I like this ethos of having that customer experience chain. So it doesn't matter where you are in that organisation, you're having an effect on Mr. and Mrs. Jones at the end of that chain, because everyone's got a link and a part to play, and it doesn't matter whether you're a leader, whether you're a IT bod or a finance assistant or whoever. Everyone has got their role to play in providing that organisation customer experience, and I'm very passionate about customer experience as well, which is good, seeing it's my job. But it's absolutely vital that people take the leadership role for and ownership of what they're trying to deliver for their customer, whether it's internal or external.
So what's, I guess it's not what's the answer, because that's always difficult, but is it that there needs to be, you know, if there is a qualification or whatever it looks like, or is there a course of some form that needs to take place, which is actually that leaders need training at the moment in housing? Is that the issue? Is that people often, and I know this from my own experience, you do well in a certain role and then you get promoted and you get promoted, and so we've got people who are running divisions that aren't good leaders. So is there a training piece around this? Do you think that's where the biggest issue is, or do you think it's that there are businesses which have become so commercial that unfortunately people can't lead in the way they want to?
I think for me, in some of the research I've done, it's both of those. It's having some sort of, whether it's a training piece, whether it's an awareness piece, and it's that culture versus qualification, if you like, of leadership. You have lots of people who are professionally trained in leadership, but they're not necessarily the most aspiring leader, but they need that element of that qualification, that professional side of things, as well as that culture piece. And then it's also for me, it's how we can instill that and empower that with others. And I'm just going to bring Claire in, since I can see Claire's hand up.
I was just reminded that I was pleasantly surprised when I started working for my own organisation that part of the mandatory e-learning thing, you know, everyone has to do like hundreds of different e-learning modules when they start a new job, you know, in your induction. You spend the first 3 months in new jobs staring at a screen. I was pleasantly surprised when I joined my own organisation that one of those e-learning modules was around emotional intelligence. And the organisation quite openly saying to all new employees, we think emotional intelligence is important. We want you to be yourself. We want you to be authentic. We want you to stand up for what you believe in. We want you to speak with a tenant's voice. I thought that was quite an unusual thing to hear in the sector.
And powerful. How powerful did that make you feel?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think for me, it's having that, and I kept referring back to it throughout today, is that emotional intelligence. And the authentic leadership piece for me is having that emotional intelligence, never being afraid to question yourself or those around you. The white paper refers to it, the green paper referred to it originally, of almost breaking that stigma, breaking that mold. throughout social housing, and moving on from there, really. You know, we do it in other aspects of throughout the customer journey. And I think, Sally, you referred to it earlier, when we're talking about that customer journey, really understanding, really unpicking what it feels like for customers, what it feels like for colleagues. The customer experience and employee experience is so closely intertwined. We have to get those journeys right. It's almost the same as a leadership journey. How we, throughout our leadership journeys, throughout the organisation, really promoting that emotional intelligence. How are we as a sector promoting that leadership awareness that's needed? So we're moving away from that manager principle, which we do absolutely need managerial skills. We absolutely need those measures, those performance issues, and awareness in place. But it's also, we need those managerial points as well. And I think that's bringing back to the point Matt was challenging me on, is, do we need that e-learning? Do we need something that really prompts the questioning, the curiosity and the ambition around leadership and that emotional intelligence?
And it is really hard because, you know, getting the time to do that is one thing, but also it's a huge piece for the whole sector. And, you know, I think Claire mentioned it earlier, you know, the tenants, or there are a number of businesses where tenants don't trust their associations right now. And it's having a knock-on effect of wider society going, oh God, social housing is still poor homes and it's this, that and the other. That stigma isn't going away because of the customers that are being loudest about their experience of those that are living in poor quality properties. So who is going to lead that change? And I think ironically that brings it back. Ro, I know Sally's mentioned in the chat there that one of her previous finance directors had the words, "It's the tenant's money," permanently on his whiteboard. I think it's something that easily does slip away, and it's something that I challenged. There was a piece that actually came on to LinkedIn the other day. It was a recruitment piece, and someone saying, if you're a good recruiter now, you should be charging 18 to 20% on every fee, because this is your worth, this is this, this is this. And I was like, I work in social housing, like this is tenants' money, and it's like, no, like it's not because of not being good at my job, it's because that isn't morally right. And I think that's where often the sector does get things sometimes wrong, is going, oh, we know what tenants want, but they haven't actually asked. And actually we talk about leadership, and that I know there are businesses at the moment who have got properties that are in poor states of disrepair, and yet the leadership answer is to go and buy more stock and start doing development because they need that from a commercial perspective. Those balances aren't easy, but leadership is also about branding and about what the message you're then putting out there to your tenants. And the moment tenants are going, but they don't care about our stock, they just want to make more money on new. So how is that being done from a leadership perspective? And I agree with so much of what you said, Joe. I just think there is this piece around what is leadership is cultural to an organization a lot of the time. And it's that we keep coming back to on these roundtables is arguably the biggest challenge that we've got.
Yeah, and I think it's, when we talk about leadership, just what you were saying there, it's, if you look at the traits I spoke about with being an authentic leader, it's communicating, it's being open and transparent. As a sector, that's what most organisations are aspiring to be to their customers. So it's almost, whilst yes, as individual leaders within organisations challenging, it's as a organisation within that sector, as a sector, are we demonstrating that authenticity piece as a whole of being open, transparent, open to challenge, accountable, and I think that Claire picked up earlier, it's making sure we're all of that, as well as being communicative. If we've got stock that's necessarily not where we want to be, but we're building new stock because we need to get the money in to then be able to repair that stock, how are we communicating that? How are we doing that? Thank you, Sally, for the good luck.
And how is that leader, like I say, from a leadership perspective, there are a lot of businesses in the trenches at the moment, and you need leaders to pull you out of that. If you don't feel you've got them, or if you feel you could be one of them, how empowered are you to be that in your organization? Sally did mention there just before she had to go. So as Jo has mentioned, she is doing her dissertation on this, and I just want to put a shout out just as we're coming toward the end of the session. If you'd like to get involved in it, Jo, talk through kind of what you're looking for and how people can help?
Yeah, so what I'm doing currently over the next 3 to 4 weeks is just holding approximately 30-minute interviews with different people in the sector. So if you're interested, do drop me a line, and I'm interviewing anyone who's a consultant, stakeholder, board members, chief exec, leaders, colleagues, customers, just getting that well-rounded piece of what are the expectations of leadership in social housing moving forward.
So I'll put Joe's details on the follow-up email, and obviously I'll tag you all in on LinkedIn. If you'd like to get involved with that, please do. As Joe's already mentioned, next week, I'm just aware people are already more and more meetings. That's always the problem with the week before the bank holiday. So I just want to wrap it up a minute early. But next week, there won't be a roundtable next week because it is after the bank holiday. And anytime I've tried to do one on a Tuesday after bank holiday, people have gone, I don't have the time. So it will be a week off. But after that is Ben Jenkins, who, if you're not following, was perhaps a bit of a controversial person to have onto some of the roundtables, but he's very, very vocal about the tenant journey and what he's seeing from the organisation of which he is a tenant and what he'd like to see change. So he's coming on, so it should be an interesting one. And obviously all of this is always backed up by my recruitment piece. I never like to do the big sell, but these are all free, and I keep them free, but they are backed up by the recruitment side. So if anyone needs any recruitment support, please say. The only person I wish had stayed a little bit longer was Lara Oya-Daly, just because she is about to become president of the CIH, and it'd been nice to have fired her a question just as we were going out there in terms of that leadership piece. And I know her whole leadership campaign is going to be around making businesses anti-racist. So watch out for that and watch this space. But Joe, thank you today. Thank you so much for everyone else who came along as well. And best of luck with this station, Joe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers,
See you,
everybody.
everyone. Take care.